Thanks for tuning in to Spend Less, Live Well with Dr. Josh Luke, dropping serious wisdom, integrating healthy living, finance, and faith into the healthcare process to live your best life. Watch us on YouTube or listen anywhere podcasts are found. Spend less and live well. Welcome back to Spend Less, Live Well. I'm Dr. Josh Luke, and this is a bonus episode. And it's a bonus episode because there's a movement going on in our country right now that requires all of our attention. And I think myself included, I'll be the first to say that I don't necessarily think that I would have always said it required all of our attention. I kind of thought it was an issue for whether it's the police department or politicians or something else. I'm not sure, but I have a good friend from high school, been friends with him for more than 30 years, and we are going to spend some time interviewing him today about the Black Lives Matter movement, about what's going on with the protest, about how we can have a real conversation as Caucasians and non-African Americans about how we can also do our part in championing equality in this country. So we're going to take a break from the focus of healthcare, healthy living, parenting, responsible financial management, and reduction of healthcare spending, and really stick to the one issue in all of those things that we do on our regular show of just really responsible living. And that's why I wanted to kind of retouch bases with my buddy of 30 years. I'm going to introduce you in a second to my high school teammate and one of my best friends in high school, Jerome Facione. And I'm going to ask Jerome to read you a Facebook post that he wrote. And it's actually the second of two he wrote that really moved me. And as much as Jerome and I were best buds in high school, I've seen him, I think, twice in 30 years, not for lack of interest or love for each other, just he went to Northern California for school, went to Hawaii to finish playing ball. He's a great basketball player, and ended up settling in Northern Cal. And I really never left Orange County except for a few Johnston, Nevada for grad school and some other things. But it's my pleasure today to welcome to the show my buddy of over 30 years who I have a love for and I've loved for years, and you're going to find out why, Jerome Facione Sr. Jerome, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Jerome, I would like to ask you, first of all, just to share with us your role right now, your occupation. Share with us what you do and how long you've been doing it.
So I currently teach at Bellarmine College Preparatory in San Jose. It's an all-boys Jesuit school. I teach 4 U.S. history classes to juniors and teach a senior elective called African American Experience, which kind of is an African American Studies course. And I coach the freshman basketball teams for the last 20 years also.
Okay. That's great. So Jerome, I'm going to ask you 2 or 3 questions, and then I'm going to ask you to read your Facebook post.
All right.
And what I love about this conversation is I don't know how many African Americans I'd be comfortable asking these questions to, which is why you and I are here today, because we want to have a conversation that others can hear and say, hey, I can do that. I can do some of these things that Josh and Jerome discussed and suggested. So the first question I have for you, and I think a lot of Caucasians have wondered this, not so much when we were growing up in the 80s, but in the era of political correctness, I think it often. Does being called Black offend you?
Again, I have to start by saying that all these answers I give are my perspective, and different people feel different ways. For me, Black and African American are the same thing. And it's also the tone in which you use when you're saying the word. You can say Black in a positive way, you can say it in a negative way. And so, but for me, that's never been a sticking point. There are several words that are sticking points, but Black or African American has never really been, that issue for me.
Do you have relatives, friends, or colleagues who are African American who are offended by being called Black?
I literally don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a random question, but when people use the term black and white, does that offend you for any reason?
No.
Okay. And in my opinion, it shouldn't. It's just a term that says it's all, one way or the other. There's no gray area. But these are questions that I think a lot of Caucasians have, and I just wanted to put them to you before you share your story here. Do you have a preference being referred to African American or black, or is it one and the same?
I don't have a preference. Again, to me, it's about how you're addressing me, how you're using the words. I mean, you can use African American in a derogatory way, the same way you can use black in a derogatory way.
Yeah, sure. And do you get these same type of questions from your students in high school?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, hey, at this point, guys, I want to ask Jerome to read, and it's going to take about 3 minutes, but it's going to be worth your while because not only does Jerome share his story and opens up his heart, but he recognizes that he was provided opportunities that others may not have been. So, Jerome, do you just want to go ahead and read that for us, please?
Yeah. Just to kind of preface it, so I was just sitting there and I wrote this out in about 5 minutes as I was feeling really, I'm kind of a on the spot kind of guy that kind of goes off the cuff. And so this is about much more than police brutality. This movement is about the inequality and imbalance of opportunity in this nation based on the color of an individual's skin and the economic standing that exacerbates that problem. I am living proof of the crisis our nation faces. I was born in Toledo, Ohio in 1971 and was put up for adoption for primarily financial and racial reasons. My birth mom's family did not want me. My birth dad's family was impoverished and unaware of my whereabouts. I was put into Catholic charities awaiting either adoption or a life in the foster care system. My parents, Peter and Noreen Facione, who are white, were driving through Toledo and decided that they wanted to find a sibling for another African-American child, Chris Facione, that they had adopted. So they stopped into the Catholic charities to inquire. After very little thought, they decided that they would adopt me at 2 weeks old. On that day, my life trajectory changed. On that day, I was given a different life than the one I was originally destined for. I will give you just a few examples of what I mean by this. I was raised in Orange County, California, where I lived in a middle-class enclave called Placentia. I had economic and physical security for my entire childhood. I never worried about where my next meal was coming from. I never worried about gang violence as a teenager. Most of my peers at El Dorado High School were going to be college bound. My point being, I never had to struggle with much except the fact that I was Black living in an all-white world. Racism did play a major role in my childhood, but I was afforded opportunities to continue to better my situation. When we talk about opportunities, I have so many examples of what having my parents behind me meant in life. Going to college was never a choice. It was an expectation based off of their backgrounds as college graduates that they instilled in me. When I was 19, I ran into a situation that would have ended that dream for many in this country. My girlfriend got pregnant, and when I called my dad to tell him I was in trouble, he said, "You will finish college and you have our support." So I was a single father in Hawaii, raising my baby boy Jerome while finishing college. That would not have been possible without the opportunities afforded by my parents. Because of all the opportunities afforded to me, I found myself as a station manager at Hertz Rent-A-Car and then a teacher at Bellarmine College Preparatory, where I spent the last 20 years educating young men about these exact topics. I am a product of the environment I was afforded. When people say, "Wow, you have done well for yourself," which is code word for, "Wow, a Black guy that found success," I am always reminded that my success is all closely tied to the opportunities I was afforded in life. And the truth is, many in this country, based on historical events, are not afforded these opportunities. Racism has plagued my life, but economic and educational opportunities have allowed me to succeed nonetheless. I have had a multitude of negative interactions with police officers, ranging from just a typical harassment to having guns pulled on me for allegedly stealing my own car. It has been a continuous problem in my life. I lost it. From the time I was 16 until today as a 48-year-old. I fear police officers. I understand that they are not all bad, but it only takes one bad one for me to no longer be around for my children. They have the power, and they know they have the power, and that is what makes them different from regular citizens. Until all Americans have a real chance at success, we will have these problems. Until all Americans are outraged that some in this country are born into situations that deny them the ability for success, we will continue to be plagued with these problems. History is real. The effects of history are real. We must address the inequalities that have existed in this land since 1619, continued through the creation of this nation in 1776, and continue till today. I am not an example of an African-American man who made it through the system. I'm an example of an African-American male who was afforded opportunities to be successful in America. If more African-Americans were afforded this opportunity, we would not be facing the crisis we are as a nation.
Well, if you weren't moved by that, folks, there's so much in that post. And Jerome, I'm going to ask you to read the prior post you did on May 27th later in the show. So if in the meantime you could bring that up, that would be great. But this is, guys, this is, one of my best friends from my teen years. And so I know his heart, and I watched his progression and education. And reading this and hearing him read it was literally like exactly just a history of how I've watched my buddy mature into this great man who's a leader in his community. And there were so many topics in there. There were so many topics in there that I want to cover. So I want to ask him this question. And guys, I'm just going to throw out there a lot of the white people perceptions, the Caucasian perceptions, because Jerome and I have always had a relationship where we can talk about anything, and we're going to continue that today. For listeners who don't know Jerome, or even if you do, the Caucasian community often stereotypes African-American history professors as extremists for the African-American social justice cause or for other causes. Jerome, do you find this stereotype to be true? And I know it's just your opinion. I'm just asking your opinion on it. And number two, and here's the very serious one. Do you personally resent all white people, some white people, or no white people? And if so, why? Because I think there's people that perceive that some African-American history teachers just hate white people.
So let me start with, every year I have juniors and sophomores that come up to me and say, that are white, that say, hey, Mr. Facione, am I allowed to take your African-American history class? And I always remind them that I'd love for you to take my African-American history class. African-American history isn't meant for Black people. African-American history is a part of U.S. history. And the reason why we need to have an African-American history class is because oftentimes in U.S. history classes, Black history is not covered. So do I think Black history teachers are extremists? Like any profession, there are probably some Black history teachers who could be classified as extremists. They may take more extreme views on specific issues, but I think simply teaching the history of African Americans does not make you an extremist.
So the other question that I wanted to see if you would answer is, do you personally resent all white people, some white people, or no white people? And if you do resent some, what is it that usually is the trigger of that resentment? And I think some people obviously are going to know part of the answer to this because they already heard your story about being raised in a interracial home. But yeah, love to hear your answer to that.
So it's a complicated question. I think I've been afforded opportunities that many other African Americans haven't, being raised around white people. And so I did, after most of the experiences that I had as a child, both with police officers, friends who were racist, parents who were racist, that I developed this sense of distrust of Caucasian people. And so I always had my guard up, particularly Caucasian people over the age of 40 or 50 that I would sense had that historical background. So I always have to be conscious and make myself not prejudge. But yes, it is a part of my DNA from my life experiences to be distrustful of white people, but I also am an educated man and know that that is my issue, not their issue. And I'm the one that needs to overcome that.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And Jerome, I don't know if you know this, but two things I wanted to point out. About 8 years after high school, Jerome and I hadn't seen each other. He was working in the Bay Area, I think for Hertz at the time, right? He had his son living with him as a single father, I think, correct? I asked him to come meet me for dinner because I was doing some work in Northern Cal, and he said, "Yeah, let's do that." He was running late, but when he got there, guys, this is one of my best friends from high school. I could sense he was uncomfortable, a little more uncomfortable with me, and I wasn't sure if it was just we haven't seen each other in 8 years, or I sense that something's changed. You know, something's changed as he's learned more about his history and his culture. And I really didn't speak to that then, but I definitely felt it. You know, I definitely felt it, and I learned through the years that it wasn't a resentment towards me. It was just, a man who was educating himself and becoming worldly. I wanted to point that out, but you also mentioned, I don't know if you knew this, but I worked in nursing homes, and racism is alive and well in nursing homes, and it's never should be well, but it is out of control. You mentioned the generational gap. How do you address that with your students? Because I don't see that with millennials, and I think Gen Xers, we were somewhere in the middle, but with the millennials and now the Gen Zs, I'm hopeful that we've made much more progress. What's your position on that?
We always talk about how for movement to happen, for progress to happen, that generation has to go away. The generation that perpetuated it, that pushed it. And so I'm always hopeful that this next generation will be able to strip off all of the preconceived stereotypes, the things that were taught to them by their parents, and begin to form more educated opinions about the way the world works. And part of that also has to do with as we become more globalized, people have access to more things. They can see images that break those stereotypes that have been established to them by their parents, as opposed to when we were younger, where the only black people you guys saw in Orange County was me and my brothers, and then In Living Color that was on TV, and so now we have so much more access to different things that people are able to see that the world isn't as simple as, some people make it out to be.
Tell us really quickly about a little bit about your family, your brothers, your sister, and the dynamic there. Were they? And I haven't spoken to. I talked to Chris a little bit on social once in a while. Haven't spoken to your other brother Sean in years and years, or Beth. But where do they sit on this? Do you see yourself with different perspectives than them, or are you guys all kind of unified in that regard?
No, I mean, I think that we best define what it means to be Black in America. Everyone has different opinions, different feelings about different stuff. You have my brother Sean, who wasn't adopted till he was 7 years old. He spent the first 7 years of his life living with a Black family in Ohio. And so he had a much more difficult time, I think, kind of assimilating into what life was in Orange County, and struggled a little bit more, say, than my older brother Chris, who kind of fit right in and kind of, I mean, he continues to live down in San Diego. He's never really been the one that had a lot of issues around race, and then I ended up, after I left Orange County, I went up to Northern California to DVC, and I went from a primarily all white environment to a primarily all Black environment where every one of my teammates was Black. I lived in a house with all Black guys, and that's where I kind of found more of who I am, and where I kind of fit into the world. And so, and my sister Carol, who's always been unbelievable. Here's a white girl who was,
Yeah, awesome.
who was given 4, Black siblings in Orange County to have to. I use the word deal with because I know she took a lot of crap from people about having, Black brothers and Black sister, and she never once kind of, threw us under the bus or wasn't there for us, which is remarkable. And she's a remarkable person.
No doubt about that. And your parents, your dad wrote a very moving post on LinkedIn or Facebook the other day as well, and I appreciate you sharing that. Jerome, are you comfortable with people following you on a certain social media page? And if so, what would that be? What would you like to share with them?
I only do Facebook. I'm not a big Instagram, or, I'm kind of a dinosaur when it comes to that stuff. And so, I like to put stuff on Facebook.
Cool. And you're comfortable with people that you don't know personally following you, if that's okay. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's Jerome Facione Senior on Facebook. Check it out. Jerome, I mentioned to you I wanted to get into some what a lot of people might consider touchy topics, but the goal of this conversation was I was really convicted back on May 27th when Jerome posted kind of the first post as the protests started to emerge. And Jerome, I'm going to ask you if you can read that post from May 27th that starts as a teacher of African American history for 20 years. Can you read that one to us really quickly? I was going to read it, but I think it's just so much better in your voice.
Yeah. As a teacher of African American history for 20 years, I constantly get reminded of the atrocities African Americans have faced in this country since its birth. My students always ask, it's much better today than it was back then, right? Some things have changed for the better, but others have just become more entrenched in our society. It is clear to me now, after having dozens of conversations with several colleagues, friends, family, and ex-students, that none of this will change until everyone is tired of it. The Facebook pages of my acquaintances that are people of color are filled with references to the incidents in Minneapolis and New York, and I really wish I could say the same about the majority of my white acquaintances. I don't know why. Is it that they don't identify with it? Do you feel like you may alienate yourself from your friends? Do you just trust the police unconditionally? I would truly want to believe that if the same thing happened to me, every one of you, black, brown, white, etc., would speak out in protest for the injustice I suffered. Maybe it's too much to ask for. I don't know anymore.
So that post really got me thinking and convicted me. And I didn't respond to Jerome or post anything initially because I really wanted to take it to heart and say, Josh, look yourself in the mirror and you know, address each of these questions and challenges that Jerome has laid out here. And the first day, my response to Jerome was going to be, hey, I really want to do my part. But the truth of the matter is, and that's probably a lot of law enforcement listening, with all the corruption that there has been with the Los Angeles Police Department in our lifetime, literally from the first time we were able to read and turn the news on, the LAPD had corruption cases and they haven't gone away. The LA sheriff now, corruption cases, Orange County, conspiring with the district attorney, with jailhouse snitches and evidence missing, and it's all over the media. And I understand maybe San Diego has gone through the same challenges. So one of your posts reference, it's the 2% that concerned me because that I could die. And you put it so plain and simple that, you know, that really hit home. But then I said, but wait, it's not just the 2%. The top levels of law enforcement are really given hall passes to think they're invincible. In fact, it goes down as far. And again, I'm not hating on law enforcement. I'm pointing out some things that are frustrating to those of us who don't have this blanket of protection. It's as far as the sticker on the car that says I'm a fireman or I'm a cop. That means you don't pull me over. It's, and that may seem menial, but it just goes to show the power. And so again, my first reaction to Jerome's the post you just read was, I don't post more so because I don't want to be targeted by cops. And there's times where I'm mad as heck at cops for some of the abuses that I've read about. But then Jerome, when I finally did say, hey, Jerome, here's my position. And he said, but Josh, it's in my opinion. And why don't you just share with them? I thought you it's about social status is what you said to me. So talk a little bit about that, because I really am buying into what you shared with me.
Yeah, to me, like when I say 2%, I truly do believe that the majority of officers who go into law enforcement are going into it for the right reason. I believe that there are some who are angry and upset, and this is their moment to have power. The problem lies, and when you talk about it being at the highest level, the problem to me is perfectly defined in George Floyd. You had one officer kneeling on a man's neck and 3 officers who may supposedly be the good officers watching as he did it. And this basic mindset within, to me, the police community, which is it's us against them. I won't stand up against another one of my officers. And so that's what I wanted to clear that up first. So when I talk about the 2%, I don't just mean that 2% have issues. I mean, I believe 2% are just evil human beings who should not have a badge no matter what.
Sure.
You know? And then so with the social stats, like that's the other thing that people don't understand, that the other reason why I feel somewhat more safe than I believe a impoverished African American living in East Palo Alto, I know what I have behind me. I know that I have money to protect myself. I know that I have colleagues and peers that are well known and powerful that can protect me. It's not fair that I have that and other people don't have that. So when I talk about social status, I talk about, and you know, social status in this country isn't just about social status. Social status is tied to race. That historically, we've created this hierarchy in this country. And so to be Black in America, for the most part, means to be economically disadvantaged. You know, and so with those things being so tied together, I hate when people drop the, Jerome, it's not about race, it's about economic status. Dude, those things are tied together.
Yeah, for sure.
You can't disconnect those two things.
So my daughter the other day, you know, in our conversations, wanted to be a voice. She wanted to say this isn't okay. And so she did a Blackout Tuesday post, but it was one of the 4 or 5 hashtags that she put in there as an impressionable 17-year-old who said, this isn't fair to minorities. As a Caucasian, she said, this isn't fair to minorities. On her team, her song team, her best friends, African-American, Asian, Latino. And so she hashtagged All Lives Matter. And she's been basically getting harassed and cyberbullied ever since then, even though she actually deleted the All Lives Matter hashtag. She deleted the comments so people can't do it because they were getting very nasty. And I think this conversation is growing on Twitter. I saw yesterday it's growing on Twitter. And Jerome, I know you and I talked briefly off air about this, that you understand where she was coming from, but give us a better understanding of why many people were offended by that.
So All Lives Matter was basically a code word for Black people be quiet, everyone's treated the same, everyone's life matters the same. Just like when someone said Black Lives Matter and someone said Blue Lives Matter. You know, it's a way to minimize the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and to make it disappear, which is what this has always been about. To, you know, when Kaepernick kneeled, people didn't think about the real issue, which is a real issue. Black people not having the same opportunities in this country as white people. Instead, they chose to focus on somebody kneeling in front of a flag. You change the narrative in order to minimize the movement. I want to be clear about this, though. You can't be afraid to say what you think and feel. So your daughter, what she's trying to say is she has a lot of friends and she cares about all of her friends the same. All Lives Matter is like this: make America great again. That will always be connected with race, racism. That's just what it's become. And so you can't use that phrase. You can't wear the red hats without it being connected to that, because of certain people that have hijacked that hat, that slogan, whatever it is. And so I would say to your daughter, all you can do at this point now is to articulate out as clearly as you can what you meant and that you didn't mean to offend, and you truly apologize for how it came out. You know, and so, but I mean,
she did do that. It seemed to make it worse, but we're dealing with teenagers as well.
Yeah, and that's all you can do. All you can do is be clear, and you can keep pushing the narrative. You can also learn. You can learn from what you said. One of the main things I think my class does, I get seniors that are, you know, 17-year-old boys, and they come into a room, and the first day their mouths are zipped. because everyone's afraid of being the racist in the room. And we talk about how you have to be free to talk, and those who are offended have to be free to teach. And that it has to be that kind of dialogue, that someone says something. Again, purpose matters. If I hear someone come up to me and say something like, you know, black people, they're all criminals, I hate black people, there ain't gonna be much teaching that can happen there. Sure. But if someone says to me, don't black people commit more crimes than white people? We can have a conversation. We can pull out statistics, you know, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask that question because someone may call you a racist.
It leads to meaningful dialogue when approached and so many of the things you just said, I want to touch on. Folks, our guest is Jerome Facione Sr. He is a professor, teacher at Bellarmine College Prep in San Jose, California, a teacher of African American history, as well as U.S. history. And he's also a friend of more than 30 years, one of my best friends in high school. If you didn't catch the earlier part of the interview, please go back and listen, because it really sets the table for what we're talking about. And there's two parallel topics that I want to talk about. Jerome and I are taping this on June 4th, I think the date is today.
Yeah.
On June 4th, 2020. So much has changed in regards to the Black Lives Matter or BLM movement in the last week. And I want to give you two examples. When Jerome posted on May 27th, hey, I haven't seen any of my Caucasian friends post that they're outraged. Here we go again. This is, you know, every other month or so, it seems like there's a you know, police brutality against African American. Why aren't I not seeing that? And that moved me. And I said to myself, could I actually write Black Lives Matter? Because if I did, I think I would get harassed. Now, a week ago, I believe that would be true. Now, you could have probably presented an argument that maybe here's how you need to present it when you do that, so you don't. But the point is, now I think Caucasians can do that and will not be harassed or whatever the, you know, cyberbullied, as I mentioned, was going on with my daughter. What really takes that and exemplifies that even further, and I'm gonna give you a chance to address this here in a sec, Jerome, you already touched on it, is what happened with Drew Brees yesterday. Drew Brees, and I love that there's an evolution of thought process here, because what Drew is trying to say is, I don't think kneeling against our flag is an appropriate protest for anyone for any reason. But during the midst of this very passionate national movement for BLM, his teammates, his biggest supporters, came out and said, well, bro, we got to talk. And Drew wasn't necessarily going against the movement. He was just saying, I would choose a different protest. But now all of us have had our eyes open to, well, that's your perspective, but understand how our perspective is a lot deeper in the trenches in some ways than yours are. And the Colin Kaepernick thing is starting to come up a lot more now. And all you have to say, and you said it, Jerome, and I've seen it on social the last couple of days, is this is what he was talking about, right? So share your thoughts on that, because a lot's changed even since your post a week ago, and your post hit on the head of the nail. When are others going to get engaged in the BLM movement?
You know, it's ironic. I mean, I think I've received probably about 30 messages from individuals who said to me, I posted for the first time, and I got a lot of backlash from a lot of people that I know, but I feel good about myself, you know? And so when you said earlier that one of the reasons you thought about doing or not doing it, talking about police, was retaliation. And I really, from my own experiences and conversations with people, it's never really been about retaliation from police. It's retaliation from their social circles, the people they hang out with, the people they know. And one of the things I always teach my students is there was only one thing white Southerners hated more than black people in 1955. It was a white person who supported black people. Because they said, you know, black people can't help but being black, but a white person who joins the black cause, and so I think there's still a lot of that being able to put onto your post. You know, I had a great back and forth. I hope he doesn't mind that I do this. Danny McInturf.
Sure, one of our classmates.
Yeah, this great back and forth with him. He's a more conservative dude. I get it. You know, he lives out in Sacramento, and he posts all this stuff about you know, the riots and black people and this or
Wait,
that.
there's conservatives in Sacramento?
Yeah, yeah. So,
Not many, huh?
so I sent him a private message and kind of went, Danny, you know, what are you doing? You're talking about arming yourself and killing black people. You coming after me? You know, and he goes,
Yeah.
oh, no, I don't mean that. And I go, and he goes, I hate racism. I hate this. I go, you know what? That thing you just typed here, I dare you, post it on your Facebook page. And I was 1,000% confident he wasn't going to post it. And he posted it.
Uh-oh.
He put it on his Facebook page, and you know, and you know, that said a lot to me about who he is as a person, and maybe, you know, what he really does. So not that it brought us like this, but it definitely brought him a little closer to me in the fact that I think we can have conversations to try and find a middle ground on what's happening.
Yeah, such a great point. So I just want to recap our prior conversation, just wrapping up on kind of the experience my daughter had in trying to say all lives matter, because she has friends that are other minorities, and she thought it was a way of saying, you know, hey, we need to make sure there's equality across the board. And Jerome's initial reaction was, well, because it's the anti-message. Our message is specific to the African-American community. It's a movement. The BLM is a movement. And if you want to have separate movements, you know, separate movements need to be separate. But I had no idea it was actually, yeah, you just said right away, that's offensive because it's against us. And it's so interesting. And that's why we're having this conversation right now, is because I want to develop a roadmap for Caucasians to engage and be the voice towards equality. And right now, there is not a Latino Lives Matter or an Asian Lives Matter movement. The movement that's been around for years is Black Lives Matter. And again, I'm encouraged by the fact that from, you know, late May 2020 to early June 2020, I, as a Caucasian conservative male, can say, I'm now comfortable hashtagging BLM and post and getting out there. And I think Jerome's point's right on. There's no question. I would get head scratching and some questions from my conservative friends. But had I done it 2 or 3 weeks ago, it would have been a lot worse. But now I tell you what, Jerome, this wasn't on my list, but I was very encouraged as a conservative Caucasian to see so many conservative Caucasian friends participate in Blackout Tuesday, because in my heart, this is not a political issue. This is an equality issue. And I was really encouraged because my thought was, hey, do you want to give liberals the opportunity to make this political? Because if you don't participate in Blackout Tuesday, that's what you're doing. Do you agree with that?
I think it's interesting. Politics aren't, you know, it's not real. Like when you think about what comes up with politics, it's all driven by different things, you know, whether, like, my students always ask, why do we only talk about immigration during election time? No one else cares about immigration. I guess because ultimately the country wants illegal immigration. The country gets free labor. You know, people make money off of illegal immigrants. We talk about it when it's time for elections because we rally up everybody. That's just the reality and truth of it. Do I think, you know, I'll tell you what I think. If you can say that you don't care about whether there's equality in this country, yeah, liberals will have a problem with you. If you say,
well, so should conservatives, right? I mean, come on.
But that's what I'm saying. Like if you say certain people aren't going to post or aren't going to support the movement, because Josh, I'll be honest with you, there are people who I literally just think don't care.
Sure.
I can present them with, you know, this is when slavery ended. This is when segregation ended. This is, for 3/4 of our country's history, blacks have not had an opportunity to make a penny or have any educational success or political success. And so we started a race. You guys get to start at the 80-yard line. We start at the 0, and you say go. And then when we lose, you say, you got to work harder.
Yeah,
you know,
that's a really valid point.
And so for people to just acknowledge that, you know, to hear someone who's always going, oh man, you know, everybody gets killed by police. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah,
you know,
that's just ignorance.
I have a poor white friend and he made it. Why can't all the black people make it? You know, it's just always trying to find something to make it okay, instead of just acknowledging that this country is a country that is not based on equality. This is not a country based off of hard work equals success. At my school, Bellarmine, these are wealthier kids, middle class kids. Some of these kids, you take them out and put them over into Leland High School, they're not going to college. You know, they're not going to have that success. So I just wish we could get past that and start, because then once you acknowledge that, everybody can begin to change things. We can say, is it fair that this little 4-year-old kid will never have an opportunity to be successful in this country? You know, it gets tiring having that conversation where I have to convince people that there's equality.
And if I can compliment you, Jerome, you didn't have to do this. You were raised, all the things you said in your Facebook post, you know, look, I was raised and given an opportunity, and it would have been easy for you to rise above it. I mean, I'm sure you've been called, what is it, the term apple? They still use that term where you're black on the outside but white on the inside. I mean, is Oreo, that's the new term apparently, right? Do you still, I mean, as an African-American history teacher, you probably don't get it much, but you know, being upper middle class, do you still get that from time to time?
It was mostly in junior college. When I went to junior college, I was from Orange County. They were all from Oakland, and
that's enough said right there. You don't even need to take that one further, right?
And part of that was, I mean, to be honest, and it was true. You know, I was raised in Orange County. I had white parents. I didn't have much interaction with African American people. I didn't know my history. I didn't know anything. All that came at a later time.
But what you've chosen to do, Jerome, and you chose to do then, is not to pick a side, but to say, here are the blessings and opportunities I've been granted, but I am not going to ignore my cultural history. In fact, I can be courageous and brave and use it as a platform to share the message, to, you know, really end that whole, you know, Oreo, apple, whatever the terminology is. So I appreciate you sharing that, I think. And I remember I watched that transformation from afar, even though it was a long time ago and we weren't talking a lot. I felt it, no question about it. I knew that you loved me. I felt like he maybe just isn't sure how to love me right now. And I've always felt that, you know, but that's because we went to battle together on the basketball court for a few years. And by the way, I'm wearing my Eldorado basketball sweatshirt. I'm sitting here sweating in my office, talking to my buddy, Jerome Facione Sr., more than 30 years. Let's stick with some of the more controversial topics that most Caucasians and African Americans aren't willing to talk about, kind of the elephant in the room things. For any of you who don't know, there's an African American woman, Candace Owens, who's very outspoken, conservative Republican, and become much more outspoken. And you know, I don't know, in recent months, it seems like it's more of a business, and she's hitching her wagon to Trump and all these things. But I see a lot of her stuff because it really, honestly, because it educates me sometimes. But I was waiting to see what she had to say about the George Floyd thing. And I want to preface this by saying that I saw George Floyd's brother interviewed on CNN saying, I don't want my brother's picture on shirts. I don't want him to be this, you know, martyr, for lack of a better term. And after I read this long thing that Candace Owens read, the point she was trying to make, Jerome, I want to see if you agree with her point. And I'm guessing you don't agree with a lot of her points, but I'm going to say this. Her point was, there are so many African American leaders in our country right now that we should be lifting up and exposing to the rest of society that we aren't. Yet it seems that the only time we lift up an African American is when there's police brutality and the media covers it. And I thought there was some validity to that point. And instead of debating who she is and what her messages are, because even George Floyd's brother said, hey, I don't really want that either. Who are 2 or 3 African American leaders in the social justice movement nationwide that we may not know the name of?
That are current right now?
Yeah. Am I putting you on the spot too much?
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I think currently, and I think about people who are on the forefront of movements, to me, the first name that comes to mind is one everybody knows,
sure, which
is Colin Kaepernick. You know, and I think that part of the issue there is the farther back you go, you got notoriety because the white mainstream media chose you. So people always ask me, what's the difference between Dr. King and Malcolm X? Well, Dr. King was chosen by the mainstream white media to be the spokesman for the black race. So anywhere he went, the media went, you know? And so, to be honest, I can't answer that question. You know, currently, right now, who are the main spokespeople for the Black Lives Matter movement? There are no figureheads that have taken kind of a lead in nationalizing the movement.
So I have a friend locally here involved at El Dorado, interracial, is married to a Caucasian, kids in high school, and the daughter, a friend of one of my, friend of all my kids. And she posted something the other day, and she's an awesome kid. I'll leave her name out because I didn't ask permission in advance, but she wrote something to the effect of, and I just went, man, that is so right on. She goes, hey guys, here's how you're saying it, and here's how it should be said. She said, you're saying it's terrible that a black person got murdered by the police again, but it's horrible that protesters are now looting. And she said, no, here's the right way to say it. It's terrible that protesters are looting, but it's horrible beyond belief that a black person got murdered by the police again.
Beautiful words.
Yeah, and I thought that was a not so subtle way of saying get it right, and I was very proud of her for that. And again, I left her name out. I'd be happy to give her credit, but I didn't ask permission or her dad. So that said, that leads into one more question that I had. And you said to me the other day, and you just said again, I don't know who the national leaders are, and I'm just one man's opinion. But since you and I talked about I think a lot of people have this question, Jerome. What's the goal of the protest? And I'm going to give you my answer and then let you hear Jerome's answer. Because through my conversations with Jerome, I think that the point of the protest is simply to make sure people know they're mad and it's time for change. But what I said to Jerome is, can you give me 2 or 3 bullet points of what we're trying to accomplish? Because at some point, somebody has to say, here is why we're protesting. And I actually heard an interview on that yesterday about forming commissions of not just minorities, but community. And where I heard the conversation going, which is what you and I talked about earlier, with there being corruption at the upper levels of law enforcement in many departments, is, and I've seen this through colleagues that have been prosecuted in healthcare, whatever it might be, and not in healthcare. The DA and the law enforcement are perceived to be 2 different, separate, totally separate. I always say this to folks. I say this when I teach about hospitals too. Look at the name on the signature line of their paycheck. It's the same person. Okay, so you can pretend that they're separate all you want, but they're working together. And when you go to court, guys, I got news for you. It's not a fair setup. Okay, those guys work in the same building. They talk to each other offline. They have rights that your lawyer doesn't. And so so I did see that discussion taking place, that, hey, not only do we need community and minority commissions for each law enforcement agency that are required by law and have some teeth, right? They've got to have some teeth. Otherwise, there's just puppets, right? But it also suggested, and there's got to be a way to penetrate that relationship between the DA and law enforcement. So, Jerome, if I were to ask your opinion, not what the overall national goal is, what you'd like to see come out of the fact that the attention now more than ever, and guys, Jerome and I lived through the LA riots. We were only 20, but it was local. We knew those streets. Jerome and I used to play some ball down there once in a while on different teams. We grew up in this neighborhood, so we were watching street corners we knew, police departments we were familiar with. But even then, it's different. It's different. The society hasn't changed, but the movement, the point I'm trying to make is the movement is different now. What would you like to see now that the BLM movement has the attention of Caucasian and all other race America?
I'm going to be honest again about it. I mean, for me, as a teacher of history, I understand laws are just laws. Laws only matter if those who are in power enforce those laws. So we can have the 13th Amendment passed, but if Southerners are able to manipulate it into sharecropping, which was legalized slavery for the next 100 years, It doesn't matter. We can have Brown versus the Board of Education, which desegregates schools, but we're now 70 years later, and schools are as segregated today as they were in 1950. The average black kid goes to school with all black kids. The average white kid goes to school with all white kids. And so laws are laws. What has to change in this country is white middle-class Americans, moderates, have to decide that it's not okay to live in a country where race dictates your success. That white moderate Americans have to decide that they're willing to give up a little bit of what they are, who they are, in order to uplift a group of people that have been historically oppressed. I'll use an analogy. My dad was applying for a job as a president of a university. And it was between him and a Latina woman who was less qualified than him, but still qualified. And in the end, when she got the job, I know he was internally outraged, but it advanced forward something he's always cared about: giving opportunities to people who have historically not had those opportunities. And so for me, my goal and my hope of what happens with this movement is more and more of my white moderate colleagues, peers, friends get just as angry and pissed about the fact that a 5-year-old African-American kid goes to a crappy school that's underfunded, and he won't have those same opportunities as I get looking at him. I mean, really, to me, it's that simple. Having talk about, oh, we need to review the use of force laws in states. Cool, we can do that. But if the cops aren't policing themselves and people can still get away with whatever they want to get away with, that stuff won't matter and won't change anything. If we continue to have a black population that is economically deprived, politically deprived, educationally deprived, they'll continue to be subjects for abuse by a police force that knows that there is no recourse for them. So again, you could come up with the 8 bullet points we want, this, and this, but until minds change, attitudes change, we'll continue to have these same problems.
Jerome, the example you just gave of your dad, who's just an awesome dude, and he's been a lifetime academician, used to be at Cal State Fullerton, I think, when we were growing up, right?
Yeah.
What an awesome example. I mean, I don't think there, and I don't know a whole lot of people, and your dad might have been mad as heck, but the way you described it is, but he got over it, and he pointed out, or you pointed out to him, I don't know which it was, but Dad, it did advance a cause that you've been passionate about, which is what caused you to pull over in Ohio at an adoption agency and whisk me away at 2 weeks old.
Yeah.
And he's one of the folks that I do know, and I've known for 30 years now, that could that would say you're right. And a lot of people couldn't do that and wouldn't do that. And I think I'm really glad you also pointed that out. So Josh, look, this isn't about police departments and use of force. This is about a perception in America that people always talk about. It's getting better and it's getting better. And I guess you could say from our nursing home discussion, it's gotten a little bit better just in terms of how we're the generations are perceiving race. I saw something, I don't know if it was Harvard, you may have seen this yesterday. There was a professor, and I don't even know if it was recent, who was speaking to a couple hundred people in, by the way, Jerome, who would have ever thought these two jokesters from the varsity basketball team were both going to become teachers and educators and professors over time? That's crazy. I was thinking about that.
I know none of my teachers would have thought this.
Yeah, I know. Some of them are still there at Eldo, by the way. But what I was going to say is I saw this great, just 30-second clip yesterday. It was this white female, probably above middle age, probably a boomer, professor, audience full of 200, mostly Caucasian college students. And she said, I'm going to ask you a question. Stand up if you would be okay being treated as if you're African-American in this country. And nobody stood up, so she just repeated it. She goes, I just want to make sure you heard me clearly. I want you to stand up and say, I would be okay changing the way I've been treated and raised in this country and changing to being subject to what African Americans are subjected to. And not one person stood up. And so she went to the same point you did. So why do you sit by and not engage in the BLM movement? And guys, what I've learned in the last week is you don't have to hashtag BLM or call it BLM. If you're uncomfortable with that for any of the reasons Jerome and I have been discussing, whether it's social or whether it's retaliation, no, that's not the point. The point is be a voice and make the situation better. I have a podcast. I'm an influencer on a couple platforms. I write books. I have a platform to help with this. And I've felt the I don't know if guilt's the right word, but I've certainly that it's long overdue that I engage in this.
I think
Go ahead.
responsibility is the good word.
I like that. I have a responsibility to do it. Jerome's one of, all my best friends growing up, for the most part, were minorities. And what my eyes have been open to, among other things, in the last couple of weeks, is that BLM is a movement separate from the equality discussion in this country, but really kind of grew out of the equality discussion. But there's so much more to it, which is why All Lives Matter is offensive, because BLM is a movement that we don't want to distract from what the movement is about. And so let's not tweak the name to meet our purposes, because it's amazing to me that it's just like they say, writing can be misinterpreted. My daughter meant All Lives Matter as Asian, Latino, Black, everybody matters. She meant it in such a good, pure way, and she recited some Bible verses. But you immediately said it's offensive because it's the anti our movement. And I think, again, Colin Kaepernick and the movement and all the things that he's been through, so much has changed in the last week or so. I want to share a story, and I'm willing to share this one because it's posted on Facebook, and he's not a minor like the other story I shared. But Jerome and I have a mutual friend, another teammate from high school basketball, who on Facebook was one of Jerome's brother Sean's best buddies, and he told a story on Facebook of him and he's Caucasian, and him and another Caucasian friend of ours, and Sean, African American, were driving to Vegas. They were 19 years old, and for no reason at all got pulled over. And I don't think he said where. He said they were almost there. So
it was I forget the name of the road.
Oh yeah, he named the street. I'll pull it up here for you. So if you're ever going by there, I'm going to tell you how you can salute it. But what he said was they got pulled over, and they literally didn't even talk to the two Caucasians. They pulled Sean out, and they were practically arguing with him on the side of the road. And then when Sean got back in the car, and you have to know Jerome's brother Sean, of all the jokesters in the Facione family, Sean was at the top of the list. Okay, Sean was a hilarious guy, and he gets back in the car, and I don't know if he was even joking or not when he got back in the car, but they're like, "Wow, what was that all about, dude? Is everything okay?" And he's like, "They said I fit the description of somebody who committed a crime," and I really, man, that just. It just opened my eyes. Jerome, can you tell a story? And as I read it, it was, hey guys, that's like business as usual. Like that's not the first time or the last time it's going to happen. You mentioned in your post that you've had some experiences of being pulled over by the police. Can you just share one or two experiences you've had that really, made your heart start beating a little faster?
Yeah, I have two that stick out for different reasons. One of them was I was driving to catch the bus to.
Wait, hold on. It wasn't grad night when we were trying to steal that statue from the park and put it in the courtyard of our high school.
No,
we didn't have the tools to do it, but
no.
The Brea Bomb, for those of you who are local, that was our big idea at 11 p.m. on the night before graduation. Is we were going to try to take the Brea Bomb and put it in our quad. So it didn't quite happen. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
So I was driving to catch a bus to a basketball game, and I was in my early 40s, and all of a sudden I see a cop car pull behind me, and already the nerves start going. All right, what's going to happen? I keep driving, and I see a second car pull in behind that car, and so now there's two following me, and I know I'm in trouble. I don't know why, but so I keep driving, and pops the sirens on, pulls me over. A third car comes the other direction, swoops in front of my car, and I'm sitting there, and one cop comes up from the right, one from the left, both with their guns drawn, and they order me, roll my window down. I roll it down, and they said, "Is this your car?" I said, "Yes." They said, "No, it's not. Step out of the vehicle." taking me out of the car.
Where was this again? I know you already said this, but where?
It's in San Jose.
San Jose, okay.
In San Jose. And have me there. You know, one of the guys literally has the gun out and has it, you know, pointed within probably a foot from me, just standing there. And so now there's 4 cop cars, about 8 cops, and the guy asked me some questions: where I'm going, what do I, you know, where have I been, blah blah blah. I'm trying to answer. I'm nervous, you know. So he goes back to his car, sits there for about 10 minutes, comes back, tells me to get back in the car. I get in the car. He says, we inaccurately ran your license plate, and so your license plate came out as it looked like it was a stolen car. And I go, why'd you run my license plate? And he goes, that's not your concern. And I go, all right. And so I go, he grabs my license, throws it at me, and says, I suggest you change your license plates. And so, you know, and all 8 of them walk away kind of snickering, laughing. And I'm sitting there going, literally, I'm 30 seconds away from one of them shooting me because he didn't like the way I moved or something like that. And so it was one of those, again, where I just go, that doesn't happen to, you know, why they ran my plates in the first place. I have no idea.
And they literally said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh because that's not a funny story, but they literally said to you with a straight face, you might want to think about changing your license.
No apology. No, I'm sorry. This was our mistake. It was throw my license at me and ask me, because my license plate said hoops 60 and the O's are zeros. And so they put them in as O's.
Okay.
And so it didn't come out, you know, whatever happened, it didn't come out the way it was supposed to come out. So, you know, but again, their issue, not my issue. But, you know, even from the first interaction, you know, it was angry and contentious when it didn't need to be. And
you
then
said you had one more story too, right?
Yeah, this one bothers me even more. I know you'd say, man, why does it bother you more? You didn't almost die in this one. So I'm driving in the car with my 2 boys, my younger ones. So they were like 4 and 6 at the time. And I'm driving, cops going the other direction. He makes eye contact with me and makes a U-turn and starts coming up behind me. And so I'm like, oh, here we go. So pulls me over and walks up. He goes, you know why I pulled you over? I go, no, but I'm guessing I know why you pulled me over. And he kind of
didn't like that, did he?
No, he didn't. He goes, I pulled you over because you have a placard hanging in your rear view mirror. It's my parking permit.
Yeah.
And I go,
like every other American.
Every other person has their, you know. And he goes, all right, have you ever been in jail or are you on parole? And I look at him and I go, excuse me? And he goes, I asked you a question. I go, do you ask everybody this question? You ask a 6-year-old Chinese man whether he's ever been on probation or been to jail? And he goes, no, I ask people who I think may. I go, did you just say that you ask people you think might? What made me look like I'm somebody that? And my kids are in the back listening to this clown ask me if I've been in jail before because of who I. So I kind of escalated it some more, which I always tell my kids,
don't do that.
Don't do, but my mouth kind of gets the best of me sometimes. And he goes, all right, I'm going to let you go this time. I go, you're not letting me go. I didn't do anything. So just go back to your car. But that kind of, you know, there was no reason for it. Nothing except, and literally I can say in the last 10 years, I've probably been pulled over 40 times.
Jeez.
You know, and I've probably gotten 3 tickets because it was the 3 times I actually wasn't wearing a seatbelt or was speeding. But the other 37 were checks to see who I was and what I was doing. And part of that is I live in Santa Clara, California, and San Jose, which there's not a big black population. And so, you know, whatever reason they have.
Folks, there's been so many snippets of this show that you could take, and just the conversation of 2 or 3 minutes are so powerful in what we're all experiencing. I want to give you one more here. Jerome said 40 times in 10 years. I'm going to guess that I've been pulled over 4 times in 10 years, and I'm sure I deserved it each time. But again, just a real easy parallel to see what that college professor in that auditorium was challenging Caucasian students to stop and think about if you don't want to be treated the way they are, and if African Americans are being treated unfairly, why aren't you standing up and saying, there's injustice here and something needs to be done? And that was really the point of this whole story. So Jerome, I want to end by putting you on the spot. I told you I would, about if you could suggest, and you grew up, someone, just think of us that you grew up with, your good friends, Sandy and Tracy and all those others that grew up with at El Dorado, that are Caucasian, they love you. I love you. So we have a reason, as if you need a reason to engage. But can you give us a little bit of a roadmap on how you've seen Caucasians successfully engage? It's not rocket science. It's just use your platform. But do you have any experiences where you've seen, whether it's family members or friends that are Caucasian, actively engage in this movement and make a difference?
This is what I always say, and I always wish I could just say to like someone like Danny McAdoo or Jason Nicolay, you guys knew me, you know who I am,
Sure.
You know what my soul is, what my heart is. Being Black has made my life much more difficult than if I wasn't. The obstacles I've faced, the decisions I have to make. Can I give you one quick story?
Sure. Yeah, we got time.
Me and my sister are both heading into the store.
Which sister?
Carol.
Okay.
Oh, Carol, my white sister. She has her daughter with her, Caitlin, who was probably like 3. And I had Jerome with me, who was like 6. And Jerome and Caitlin both have their toys in the back. They're, playing with their stuff. And we're both going to walk into the store. And Jerome grabs his toy, and Caitlin, when they start walking in the store, I go, dude, put that toy back. What are you doing? And he goes, what are you talking about? And I go, you can't take no toy into a store. Are you kidding me? You take that toy into the store. When you walk out with that toy, I'm not dealing with that. Yeah. And my sister's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it's fine.
You can do that. Well,
this is how we shop.
Go, no, you can't do that. And those are just those little differences.
Tiny, absolutely. We've had 20 of them in the last 45 minutes. I mean,
those little things. And someone might say, oh, screw that person, that guy in the store, you can prove it was yours. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to have to spend 30 minutes, have the cops called, and have to explain and prove that toy was my toy going into the store.
Yeah.
And it really is. And multiply that by 1,000 in all the daily interactions. I always tell people, I spend the first 20 minutes of any relationship with somebody having to prove that I'm a safe Black person.
Yeah.
That I'm somebody they can trust, that I'm somebody who's articulate, whatever the hell that means, because it doesn't really mean anything, but to that person, it does mean something.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's and so what I would ask and say that all of those, the people that you'd say, the Danny Carmos, the Scott Lees, all those guys, whenever you see the injustice, imagine it's me. If George Floyd was me, and you saw that video, what would your natural reaction?
We wouldn't only be protesting; we'd be in Minneapolis protesting together. So, and those are great points. And there's been so many on this show. I'm excited to see what a difference we can make just with this show, Jerome, because I think we're having a conversation that sometimes, I'll say even myself, I'm not going to tune into this show if it's not 2 guys I know or 1 guy I know, and somebody else didn't say, hey, Josh and Jerome talked for an hour and there's a lot to be learned. Ironically, I'm going to go back to, I want to ask you one more question I forgot to ask you earlier when you were talking about there are a few terms that offend you. Is Negro something that's offensive in your mind?
Yeah, that's old school.
Yeah, I was going to say, back in the day, it seemed to be tossed around a lot, but nowadays I wouldn't ever use it. And I just wanted to confirm that because I think a lot of people have that question because I guess that is a small sign of progress, but very small, and there's a long way to go. And so I want to wrap up with this. First of all, Jerome, thank you. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for the man you've become. Thank you for all these great stories that you've shared. And thank you for having an open mind about the goal of this show was to give a roadmap to people, whether they're white or any other minority or even African-American who hasn't engaged, on how we can actively engage in this movement towards equality and this movement known as Black Lives Matter. And guys, what the message today was there is an overall equality movement as well, but Black Lives Matter wants to be known as its own movement that is specific to the challenges that are unique to the African American community, always have been. And Jerome has proven today that not all African American history teachers are extremists that hate all whites, and so many of us believe that. So let's put that aside, okay, and say, hey, we have a roadmap here on this show for how we can engage. And if you don't have a social media platform like I do, think about ways you might do it at school as you drop off the kids, or in your social circles, or whatever it may be that you do where you have a platform. So I am going to wrap up the show, Jerome, by thanking you, and also by saying, since you told me it was appropriate to use this term, and I've always thought it was, but I also wanted to ask, this is not an issue with gray area. Equality is not an issue with gray area. It is a black and white issue, no pun intended, but it is a great one to remember as everything's changing so much in these last few weeks. Long overdue, long overdue, but it's time for everyone to engage in the equality conversation. And we've given you a ton of little snippets here today to fall back on and think of and share with your friends. And guys, Jerome, are you okay with people, if they get a little snippet of our show, just sharing it with their friends and saying, here's how I want to engage in the movement? I just want to kind of get your permission.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think that'd be a great way to do it. Take 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 of these stories, Jerome and we shared so many, like 2-minute stories in this last hour, that you could just say, hey, take 2 minutes and listen to this. I want to engage in the equality discussion, and you can too. Yeah. And I challenge you as a Caucasian, put the hashtag BLM at the bottom. Even if you don't write out Black Lives Matter, maybe that's step 2. Step 1 is to post. Step 2, put hashtag BLM, and maybe the next time you do it, you're a little more comfortable, you put Black Lives Matter. I'm going to tell you it's going to be okay. And if somebody tells you it's not, then I would just ignore it, just as I teach my kids, and be the voice and use your platform. Jerome, thanks so much. And it's so great to catch up with you, buddy. And I'm so happy to see how well you're doing and the difference you're making with your platform.
Hey, can I add one more thing?
Yeah, please do.
You know, I have a lot of white colleagues that say, you know, I know this is your guys' movement. I always stop them really quick and I say, you got to understand something. This isn't a black issue. This is actually a white issue. This is an issue that needs to be solved by white America in breaking down all of the systematic racism, all those things that exist. And so this is a group effort. This isn't, you know, black people aren't going to fix it. It's going to have to be white America that jumps on. And so I go back to that first thing. You can't be afraid to talk. You just got to educate yourself when you talk, you know, and
great way to wrap up.
Yeah. And be willing to change and be willing to learn and all those good things.
Folks, if you're not inspired by these conversations, it's a great way to wrap up. Follow on Facebook, Jerome Facione. That's Facione Senior. Jerome, thanks so much. Maybe we'll do it again sometime, bud.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks for tuning in to Spend Less, Live Well with Dr. Josh Luke, the crossroads of integrating healthy living, finance, and faith into the healthcare process to live your best life. Watch us on YouTube or listen anywhere podcasts are found. Spend less and live well.